Okay, girls, good morning. Today we are going to continue with the second part of the principles of democratic rule. Okay, so last class we had left off basically here in the free elections. I had the chance to explain the free elections and why they are important for like as a basic principle of democratic rule. Um, but today I'm going to move on to the last part that I didn't have the chance to show you last class, and it's basically the checks and balances. So here it says the US checks and balances, but it works pretty much in the same way for the Colombian government. Okay, so the next principle of democratic rule that we are going to talk about is the control of the abuse of power. What does this mean? A basic principle for democratic rule is that democracy, or like the basic decisions, are in the hands of the people. That is what democracy means, the rule of the people. And the democratic government must make sure that there is no abuse of power by one specific group of people or even by one single person. Okay, so that's why we have in Colombia something that is called, and in many democratic governments, something that is called checks and balances, or the division of power. Okay, you can see it very kind of tiny in this presentation here, although I will show you a larger image later. And it's basically that government is not centered in only one person. We don't have only one person who makes all the decisions. That would be more like a dictatorship, okay? When it's only one person who makes all the decisions. Here, the government is divided into three different sections. One is called the legislative branch, another one is called the executive branch, and the last one is called the judicial branch. Just like it works in the United States, or pretty much these three branches exist in the United States, they also exist in Colombia. So each different um, a branch of power has a different responsibility in the government. Okay, that means that the executive branch is basically made up by the president, the vice president, the ministers, and they're the ones who represent the government. Okay, they are the ones who are basically in charge of running the country. Okay, of managing the country. Then we have legislative and judicial. The legislative makes the laws. Okay, that is the branch who is in charge of making the laws, passing the laws. And the judicial is the one in charge of making sure that the laws are actually followed. The judicial branch is in charge of enforcing the laws. Okay? So, here you have it a little bit clearly. Judicial interprets laws, makes sure that the laws are followed. Okay, so we have all the judges and all the courts in the judicial branch. Then we have the legislative, which is, the Senate and the Chamber of Representatives. It's all these people and groups of people who are in charge of deciding which laws should pass or should not pass, and which laws are actually helping improve people's lives or not hurting most of the people. And the executive is the one who basically is in charge of running the country. Okay? Why is this important for the control of the abuse of power? Basically, because the power is not concentrated in only one of these groups of people or in only one person. Okay? The president in the executive branch cannot make any decisions that have not already been approved by the legislative and the judicial branch. Okay? The president cannot just from one day to another make any kind of decision that he or she wants. Those laws or those initiatives have to be approved by the legislative and the judicial branches. That way, the president cannot take control over all the country decisions, and that way, the power is controlled by other people. It is also the reason why we have many representatives, for example, in the Senate and in the Chamber of Representatives, in la Cámara de Representantes. It's why we have so many people from different political parties. Okay, we are going to look at political parties next, or following this principle of democratic rule. But it's very important that in the Senate and in the Chamber of Representatives, we have different political parties, people who have different political ideas and different political views. Why? Because we want to represent as many political views as possible when we are trying to make decisions for a country. Okay? just one person might think that is the best decision for everybody, but he or she might not be hearing other perspectives. So in a democratic government, we need the representation of different perspectives. And we have that in the Senate and in the Chamber of Representatives, which are part of the legislative and the judicial branches. Okay? So we need to listen to different points of view to guarantee that there is no control of the abuse of power. Only one person thinking that that is the correct decision to make and not considering other points of view. We are going to continue then with the next principles of democratic rule. The first one is the Bill of Rights. This one is an idea which comes from the US Constitution, but it's basically the idea that we need to have certain basic rights that are included in the Constitution to protect the citizens from the abuse of certain government leaders. Okay, so sometimes government leaders, like I was telling you, that's why it's also important that we have the division of powers, but sometimes some government leaders tend to abuse their power, tend to hurt the people or the citizens who think differently from how they think. So we also need in the Constitution a certain part which is called the Bill of Rights, or in this case it's called fundamental rights in the Constitution of Colombia, where we have certain rights to be protected from possibly abusive government. So for example, we have basic rights like the right to live in Colombia. That's why we don't have a death penalty, okay? Because in Colombia, we have certain rights that protect every single citizen: the right to live, the right to freedom of expression, the right to live like like freely, okay, to express and to live freely. We have many rights that are included in the Colombian Constitution, and basically, in a democratic government, we need to guarantee that citizens are protected by the government. That should be the basic characteristic of a democratic government, that citizens are protected by the government, that they are guaranteed certain rights, that they are guaranteed certain services, certain basic living conditions, but that citizens are also protected by these rights from the government. Okay? That is the Bill of Rights. Then a culture of accepting the results of elections. Once free and fair elections are held, remember that that is a previous principle, we need to make sure that in a democratic government, people are willing to accept that those are the results. Sometimes, and it happens to all of us as grown-ups, sometimes we get sad and we don't feel comfortable with the election results. Sometimes we're not happy with the person who won the election. But in a democratic government, there should exist a culture of saying, you know what? If that was the result, the fair result, of course, not cheating or with any kind of vote buying in situations like this, we should accept who is the person who is going to be occupying that specific office, who is going to be a president, who is going to be the mayor, who are going to be the senators. Okay? So once fair and fair elections are held and a winner clearly emerges, the loser of the elections should, without resistance, evacuate the office and hand over the instruments of power to the winner. Okay? In a democratic government, nobody should stay in power for longer than they are supposed to be staying in power. Okay? Nobody should try and hold on to that power that they had, or nobody should refuse to give the power or to give the position, the governing position, to the next candidate who won fairly the elections. Okay? Here, fortunately, in Colombia, we don't have any kind of revolt or any revolutions. Most of the elections go smoothly, although we do have cases where elections are not free, where they are influenced or they are bought by other people. So that is something that we need to continue working on. That is, as we're going to see later, a limitation of democracy. Okay, a limitation of democracy is sometimes that elections are not fair and free. A lot of people cannot have access to voting. And okay, there are other limitations that we will see to democracy further ahead. The next one, human rights. Like I was telling you, in the Bill of Rights, in the fundamental rights section of the Constitution of Colombia, we included the human rights. Okay, so just like it says here, unlike dictatorships, Democracies have something completely different for dictatorships. Dictatorships, usually a single person seeks to impose whatever form of government he or she wants, and uses sometimes force and military power to enforce it. And usually a dictatorship tries to end with any kind of different views, usually through violence as well. But democracy actually looks for the opposite. Democracy wants to be inclusive. Democracy wants as many points of view to be included before making a decision. And that is only guaranteed through human rights. Okay? A democracy seeks to protect human rights above all. The right to live, the right to participate, the right to express themselves, the rights to freedom of thought, okay, of education, of assembly, of people actually being able to get together and discuss what it is that they like, what it is that they don't like about a government, how they can improve it, okay? These are freedoms, freedoms of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of information, of press, that the communication media are actually able to report and to say how they think differently, okay? That is something that democracy seeks to protect, to be inclusive, to listen to people, to allow their freedom of expression, to allow their right to property, for example. So that is something that democracies have, which is completely different to other forms of government, especially, for example, just dictatorship, where all kind of difference wants to be ended. Okay. And like I was telling you before, we have the multi-party system. It sounds funny, it's not a party, but party refers to political party, to different groups of people who associate because they have similar political beliefs. Okay, it's what we call in Spanish partido político. So a basis for democracy is that we have different political parties with different points of views and different perspectives. Why? Because in a democracy, think about Colombia, where we have, or I mean, not even Colombia, just Bogota, where we have 8 million people who all want to be heard, who all want different things for the city. It's important that we have different political parties who represent each different point of view. Well, maybe not each, but at least as many points of view as possible. And we want these people to represent them and to actually be heard in the government. Okay, so in a democracy, we need different groups of people who think differently, who represent different sectors of society. Why? Because since a democracy wants to be inclusive and wants to listen to as many people as possible, the only way in which we can do this is if we have different groups of people, different political parties that actually represent different interests. Okay, so a multi-party system is a setup where there are more than two political parties contesting for power. In Colombia, we have many political parties. We have them here. Look, we have Cambio Radical, Partido Verde, all of these political parties that are constantly applying or hoping that they will be elected to be represented in the government. Okay? The reasons for having multiple parties in a democracy are to widen the pool of choice for the best candidate for political office. If we have many options of political parties, we have many options of who are the best candidates to represent us. To offer alternative views to the government on the day as a result of the existence of an opposition. So it's very healthy to have different points of view, because that way the government doesn't just take whatever decisions the government think it's better, but we also have, in for example, in the Senate and in the Chamber of Representatives, different political parties that will tell the government, no, maybe this is not the best decision that you can make because it's going to affect this sector of society or that sector of society. So it's healthy to have somebody to let the government know if maybe whatever decision they think they are making is not the best. Okay? And to enable the opposition to act as a check on those political office. So, for example, if the government is going to make a decision, the opposition or the opposite political party can say, no, wait, you think that this is the best decision, but only for this sector of society. Maybe you are having some kind of consequences that are not going to benefit everyone. Okay? So one-party systems lead to a lack of alternatives for the citizens and concentration of powers that often lead to dictatorships. If we only have one point of view and we have only one political party who is supporting the decisions of, for example, the president, usually that can lead to a concentration of power and eventually to a dictatorship.